I love Anytown Las Vegas. The mission of this program is so important to me, and I'm really glad that you've launched this series of really important discussions around social justice issues. I do see homelessness as a social justice issue. I believe housing is a human right. I've committed my career so far to correcting that injustice. At the Nevada Homeless Alliance, we work at a system level or a macro level. So we work on policy advocacy, community building, training for homeless service organizations. We also bring together organizations, nonprofit, private, philanthropy, faith-based, really any stakeholder group that's interested in ending homelessness. We bring together in a variety of different ways. We believe that ending homelessness can't happen in a silo or from the hard work of one sector alone, that we need to work together on this issue. So we convene people as much as possible around this issue, and that's what we do in short as an organization. Oh, well, one way we convene people I almost left out is through Project Homeless Connect events. So we bring service providers together into one place to offer a variety of services in one place. So that's an exciting thing that we just started doing again. We had to put it on hold for a few months as a result of COVID-19, but we just come back to doing that again on a smaller scale for the community.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Emily. We appreciate it. If we could go to Melissa, please, if we could hear from you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me and the Nevada Partnership for Homeless Youth to participate in today's event. I think just like Emily said, we're so on the same page about homelessness being a social justice issue and housing being a human right. And I'm very excited for today's conversation to get into a lot of those intersectional areas and how homelessness intersects with so many other social justice issues that I know that everybody on this call really cares about and is invested in. But so just a little bit about me and the organization that I represent. So my name is Melissa, and I'm the Director of Development and Evaluation at the Nevada Partnership for Homeless Youth. And Nevada Partnership for Homeless Youth, or NPHY, is the most comprehensive service provider for young people experiencing homelessness here in Southern Nevada. So we basically do anything and everything that you can think of to help young people experiencing homelessness, specifically on their own, between the ages of 12 and 20, to get out of that situation and be able to transition to self-sufficiency, to success, to wherever they dream of for their future and their lives. And that's really what we do. And we do that through a wide variety of direct services, everything from outreach out on the streets, mobile crisis intervention services that we have available 24 hours a day at virtually every street corner in Clark County, to a drop-in center right near UNLV where young people can get their immediate needs met, things like clothing and food and hygiene supplies and things like that, all the way to longer term, higher level needs, such as working with a case manager, working with a therapist, working on their long-term plans for education, for employment, et cetera, working on life skills and all those types of things. As well as we also have emergency shelters and transitional housing and really just a whole plethora of programs to meet young people's needs, regardless of what those needs are. And in addition to direct services, we also do advocacy work as well. In 2018, we launched something called the Movement to End Youth Homelessness in Southern Nevada. And basically that's just a movement to bring together all different sectors and all different people to really come at youth homelessness from all angles and to really fight this issue at the root cause and at the causes that sustain this issue. And so through doing that, we've brought together hundreds of different individuals and community organizations to hold annual summits. So every year we hold a summit to bring together the community to learn about this issue and take action on this issue together. As well as in 2018, we put together the first ever Southern Nevada regional plan to end youth homelessness, which is really kind of a guiding map and a North Star so that we can all work together in a joint collaborative way toward collective goals. So we released that, and we do a lot of other advocacy work in getting laws passed and sharing with the community, et cetera, and obviously do more of that today on this call. So thank you so much for inviting me and for your time.
Thank you, Melissa, and I'm more than happy to vouch for Melissa and Nevada Partnership for Homeless Youth, as Melissa is my former colleague and dear sister of mine, doing great work in the community. Now I'd love to pitch it on over to Lenore. Lenore, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Definitely. Hello, everyone. Good evening. First of all, thank you so much, Abe, Rico, and the entire camp, Anytown. We're no longer camp. the Anytown family, for this amazing event. I'm really excited, and the energy that I'm bringing here is just really passion. This is very important. This conversation is very necessary in our communities, and I echo everything that my co-panelists shared around just really removing the lines between social services and social justice. My name is Kanisha Lenore Jean Baptiste, and I am the proud daughter of Haitian immigrants Fonso and Shima Jean Baptiste, and my pronouns are she and her. I'm a technical assistance manager with Youth Collaboratory, and what we're a national organization that provides targeting consulting services. So we do everything from TA, which is technical assistance, training, and developing research-based program models to help youth service providers focus on one goal. And that one goal is really to strengthen outcomes for youth and young adults in high-risk situations. And again, thank you so much to my tribe and my people. We're all here on this call, and I'm ready to dive in.
Thank you so much again, all of you, for being here. Really, this conversation is very important, and you're the best of the best to have it. So thank you. Moving on, I think it's time for our first topic of discussion. And I think this topic, a great topic that we could start off on, is racial disparities within homelessness, CSEC, and COVID-19. So let's start our first series by understanding this underlying problem. Many people define homelessness and CSEC inaccurately, assuming that someone is homeless only if they live on the streets. Can the panel clarify the definition of homelessness and the acronym that is the CSEC? Whoever would like to take it away, go ahead.
Well, I don't mind starting. So I'm going to go to the CSEC and the acronyms and what that stands for. And what that is the commercial sexual exploitation of children. And I just want to offer that this is a trigger warning. So I'm going to be using terms that are not comfortable for many of us. And what CSEC really stands for is an umbrella of child sexual crimes that are happening in exploitation. So sex trafficking is one version of CSEC. We also know that child pornography is another version. Early childhood marriage. This is something that we often see in other countries. Performances in sexual venues, this things such as strip clubs, we're in Las Vegas, or even online and electronic engagement of children engaging in sexual activities. So CSEC is just really this umbrella term for all of these sexual crimes that are happening to children in our community.
Yeah, and then I can talk about the general homeless definition and then kick it over to Melissa to talk about how that varies oftentimes for youth and families. How about that? Okay, so generally when I'm going to describe people as experiencing homelessness, we're talking about people who are living in a place that no human should live, right? No human should be living on a sidewalk, in a storm drain, in a desert encampment, in a car, or sleeping overnight in a bus. Those are often common places that people experiencing homelessness stay. It can include people who are staying in emergency shelters and those who are staying in transitional living projects. And then there's a much broader definition that often applies to youth and families, and I'll let Melissa explain that one.
Awesome, thank you, Emily. So yeah, absolutely. So the kind of definition that Emily was talking about for homelessness is something that a lot of times we call literal homelessness, or that is a definition that's often used by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, who really is the biggest funder of homeless services in the United States. So their definition is very important because it affects a lot of services and funding based on their definition. However, different departments of the federal government have different definitions, and that affects how different groups actually categorize people experiencing homelessness. So another much broader definition that is actually used by the Department of Education and used by many school districts, actually all school districts, and our school district here in Clark County, is a much broader definition that basically looks at homeless students as young people who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. So what that means is definitely it includes people who are living on the streets or in places that are not meant for human habitation, like Emily described, but it also includes people who just really don't have a stable, safe place that they can count on being able to go every night to sleep. So that includes people who are staying in daily, weekly motels, for instance, or that includes people who are doubled up where they're staying maybe at their uncle's house or their grandparents' house or another relative's house, but that's not really their primary residence that they can count on every night. That includes couch surfers, so youth who are hopping from friend's couch to friend's couch. That really includes, a much broader definition of just not having a stable, safe place that you can rely on each and every night.
So Melissa, you mentioned how the demographics look like as far as here in Clark County. How does homelessness look like in Las Vegas in regards to sheer numbers? And how significant is the problem throughout the state of Nevada?
That's a great question. So yeah, just to kick that off. So again, because there's a variety of definitions, that makes it a little bit hard to give a straightforward answer of just how many people are experiencing homelessness here in Nevada or here in our community. If we're to use Emily's definition that she shared, that's a very common definition of people literally living in places that are not meant for human habitation. In the state of Nevada, on an average night last year meaning 2019, there were over 7,000 people experiencing homelessness on an average night in the state of Nevada. But here in Clark County, that was over 5,000. So every single night, you can count on over 5,000 people experiencing homelessness here in our community. However, when it comes to youth in particular, last year there were 1,184 youth experiencing homelessness on an average night here in Clark County. So that's youth from all the way up into age 24 is that definition of youth. So, and these are people who are unaccompanied. So they're experiencing homelessness on their own, separated from their families. And we had over 1,000 in an average night last year. So that's really a major problem. And if we use that broader school district definition, in the 18-19 school year, we had over 13,000 students who are identified as experiencing homelessness here in Clark County schools. And those are only the youth who are identified. So we know that's an undercount. So it really, really is a major, major problem here in our community and our state. And in fact, we have one of the highest numbers in the country. Nevada itself is always ranked in the top 5 for not only the total number of young people experiencing homelessness, but what percentage of those youth are living unsheltered on the streets because we don't have adequate resources to even temporarily shelter them.
Thank you for that, Melissa.
Wow, thank you. So according to the National Alliance to End Homelessness, most minority groups in the United States experience homelessness at higher rates than the white folk. The most striking disproportionality that can be found among African Americans, who make up 40% of the homeless population, despite only representing 13% of the general population. Why are African Americans in particular overrepresented in the homelessness system?
For sure. So I can start, and that's actually a great question. And a lot of times when we walk into disadvantaged communities, we say, it's particularly Black communities that are under-resourced, we're like, oh my God, what happened here, right? But what's critical is for us to start with the cotton on our backs and the legacy that followed that over and over and over again in the systems and the denial of access, right? So the first thing is education. There is education inequality in the United States. Not all schools are created equal. Today, when COVID hit us, we've seen that schools were scrambling. How do we get laptops? How do we get Wi-Fi? And that should have been in the forefront. You have children of color, children coming out of Black communities that never had access to those resources to even begin with. And when you have low access to quality education, you have poorer outcomes to getting qualified job placement, which leads us into the next thing, right? So we're talking about job insecurity. Black people are oftentimes funneled into low job security. Again, when COVID hit, a lot of our essential workers, while our nation was collapsing and falling apart, we had a lot of Black people who were not getting paid their dues because oftentimes people of color are paid less, who were on the front lines. These were the people that we actually needed, but they didn't have insurance to go into hospitals. They didn't have a savings. And then you have the additional following of that is that they didn't probably have access to paying their rent. And so you have housing and rental discrimination. Black people are often forced into higher rent, predatory loans that have unnecessary interest fees attached to them, unreasonable fees that don't even exist when we see that white tenants are coming into these same communities. We see gentrification that is happening. We see that people are being kicked out. There wasn't any rent freezes. And let me tell you something, $1,200 is nothing. When you have a car payment, you have children to feed, and then you're having to make sure that you're sustainable. So you had a lot of these communities that were already very vulnerable, and then you had a pandemic that hit something like that. So from what I understand, what I would say the top 3 reasons is that the low access to education, which is really critical, and we see what's happening in our CCSD school district, not having access to rent and housing. We see what's happening with redlining and the history that followed from that, the destruction of Black communities when Black communities were building wealth, and then not even being able to get job security. Something as simple, right? I introduced myself, Kanisha Lenore Jean Baptiste, and oftentimes having to remove my first name, Kanisha or Kanisha, right? Because if it looks too urban or too colloquial, then I won't get that job placement. All of these systems that are usually designed to help communities be built are the same systems that have barriers that are denying Black communities access and resources that they need to build. And I will rephrase, and I will say it again. Oftentimes we walk into these under-resourced communities and we're like, what happened here? What happened? Nothing happened. We just left people there for centuries.
Yeah, and the one thing I would add to that too is the over-incarceration of people of color. And we know that our criminal justice system feeds people right into homelessness, oftentimes when they're exiting jail or prison. So I think that's another, broken system that ultimately is leading many more people down a path of homelessness than is necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything that both of you said, and thank you, Lenore, so much for that very comprehensive view of all these different factors that are so important, and absolutely incarceration also. And just to add a tiny bit more about, so a lot of what Lenore was talking about, right, was about like income inequality, right, and gaps in income and inability to make income, and so that is so important. But then something she alluded to a little bit too was about generational wealth, and I think that is really, really important when it comes to the homelessness conversation, right, because the federal government in our country literally worked with corporations to basically make it almost impossible for many people of color to become homeowners in our history. And in the United States, homeownership is really the primary way that wealth is passed from generation to generation. So accordingly, not only the history of slavery that Lenore was referring to also, but even just the more recent history of making it literally impossible for people to get loans to become homeowners made it so it was impossible to have that generational wealth passed down from generation to generation. And there was actually a recent study from Northwestern that found that, just very recent, over the past few years, that for every dollar of accumulated wealth that a white family has in the United States, a Black family has 1 cent. So that, if you're asking about how does that result in homelessness, I think that's such an important piece of the puzzle, because people aren't inheriting houses, people aren't keeping that wealth in their own family generation to generation, and that makes it so hard to have that stable housing.
And, the word that comes to mind that oftentimes gets thrown out a lot is intersectionality. And I think it's very appropriate to use that term in this conversation, because it seems that fixing homelessness is not a one-size-fits-all approach. You're in fact having to fix education, fix housing. I have a question specifically for Lenore. Law enforcement agencies across the nations have used terms like prostitution stings, or prostitute investigations when referring to minors involved in commercial sex. How does this term negatively impact CSEC youth and society at large who are looking at this from the outside in?
Yeah, and there is a lot to unpack here, right? So the term negatively impacts youth survivors because it adultifies them and this experience, right? So when we say prostitution, or this person is engaging in prostitution, there's a notion of consent. And that's where it becomes problematic. First, let's start off by saying that we live in a nation that doesn't even care if a person was a consenting adult engaging in sex work. They already don't care for those individuals. But but I'm not talking about sex works. I'm talking about children that are being exploited and sold. And when we're calling them prostitutes, when you say about that intersectionality, we find that in the world of human trafficking, Black girls also in that space are overrepresented, but Black girls are over-sexualized. Black girls are also adultified. So when we're giving them this language, we're saying that this is something that they're doing, and this is not something that is happening to them. The reason why this is problematic is because when law enforcement comes, the job of the police is to find a criminal. If there's not a criminal, they will make one. And we're starting to see that is happening to children in these things. It's sex trafficking, it's child rape. It doesn't matter if that John, that exploiter, or that trick left $1 million on the table. It is child rape. So when we talk and when we use those type of languages, what we're doing is we're practicing the erasure of that innocence, and we're making a criminal out of that child, when in reality, we need to start locking up the folks that were engaging in that behavior to begin with. And I wanted to add also, what's really problematic in the Black community is that we see the over-policing. The same thing that will have law enforcement roll up on Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old playing on the park, and saying that this was a man who had a gun and shoot him dead, is the same behaviors that are being practiced when we're finding children in these things and we're calling them prostitutes and we're not giving them the services that they need. What happens is now that they get funneled into the detention centers. And at an early age, they're already entering into the prison industrial system. So when we're talking about when Emily said that the funnels into homelessness and mass incarceration, with survivors of human trafficking, a lot of those markers are happening to them as adolescents. By the time they are 18 and they are trying to get a job, they have those records. They have those records as this is what you are doing in this city. What that creates is a decrease in services, because now it seems as if we don't have a human trafficking issue. It over-sexualizes the people that we are actually here to help. So this is why it's problematic, because it's the erasure of their innocence, and we're naming something that's not happening. No child is a prostitute. No such thing as child prostitute. There's no consent. It's child rape, and that's what we need to call it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. Just touching on something that you mentioned as well, how it's very systemic, and that brought me back to how, for Emily Paulsen, this is kind of a question for you, how earlier this year you went before the Las Vegas City Council and urged them to scrap the ordinance that makes it a misdemeanor for homeless people to camp or sleep on the streets on some city streets, and you were actually quoted saying, "We ask you to scrap this bill, come back to the table with the regional leaders who are invested in solving this issue with you, and use their expertise and use homeless people at that table." We'd love to get your input on this and why it's important to have directly impacted individuals at the table when making these decisions that affect the homeless population.
Yes, absolutely. So unfortunately, the city passed not just one ordinance, but two last year that criminalize acts of survival, sleeping on the street, sitting down on the street, even standing on the street for prolonged periods of time is considered a misdemeanor offense, punishable by 6 months in jail, up to 6 months in jail, and $1,000 fine. And one of many comments we made to the city of Las Vegas, right, was the need to work with people, especially who have experienced homelessness, on real solutions, because unfortunately, my opinion is that not just the ordinances that the city council passed that criminalize homelessness, but really their general approach to homeless services with the courtyard and how they have made funding decisions over the last year and currently really are, in my opinion, focused on a false sense of beliefs about people who are experiencing homelessness. And I believe they're unfortunately based on the belief that people who are homeless choose to be, that they are participating in a criminal behavior, that they could take advantage of services and programs and are choosing not to. And the data, and if you were to speak to people experiencing homelessness in our community, they would tell you opposite, right? There are over 1,500 people right now on a waiting list for assistance in our home, in any one of the homeless assistance programs in our community. The shelter beds in our community are almost nearly full every night of the year, which is actually why the city, the first ordinance, what it stipulated was that if there's an open shelter bed, it would be a crime to be sleeping outdoors within the city of Las Vegas. And when I think they realized after the fact, right, is that, well, our shelter beds are full already, always, right? That's the problem, right, is that as a community, we only are able to shelter 30% of the people who are homeless in our community on any given night, right? So Melissa mentioned earlier that on any given night, there's over 5,500 people in Southern Nevada alone who are homeless. And yet we only have the resources to help 30% of them. And it's even worse for young people, right? We're only able to house 10%, shelter 10% of the young people who are homeless in our community on any given night. So to say that, you know, that people are choosing to remain unsheltered and choosing to remain homeless is just wrong. It's just false. It's not rooted in any real truth, not in any data, and not on the stories that people who are experiencing homelessness would tell you about their difficulties with getting access to these services. So that is one of the reasons why it's really important to include people who are experiencing homelessness and who have recently experienced homelessness at any tables where there are conversations happening about what services, what policy, what funding is needed to address those issues. And so when the city realized, you know, that our shelters are full and they wouldn't be able to enforce that ordinance in any real way, they passed a second ordinance, which allows them to determine hours where it would be unlawful to be on the sidewalk for the purpose of street cleaning. But it did that in a way, the law was written in a really problematic way where, for example, if I was, you know, had just observed that the city streets had been cleaned and I go and I sit down, I would, if I was sitting down within that window of time where it was unlawful, I would still be subject to a misdemeanor arrest. So even if I am actually physically not preventing the streets from being cleaned, they had just been cleaned, I watched them be cleaned, and I watched the crew leave, and I sit down on the sidewalk, I would still be subject to arrest, and that's a major problem, right? And more so, it's concerning because the city of Las Vegas already spends substantially more every year on sheltering people who are homeless in our jail system than they do on sheltering people through the interventions, the program models that we know work, right, actually help someone escape homelessness and get back on their feet and be able to enter and maintain permanent stable housing. Those interventions cost far less, right? The things that work cost far less than jail. And yet we see these laws passed that would lead more people to be sheltered in our jail system, to be incarcerated, and that actually hurts their ability to gain employment, right? When you have a criminal record that was totally preventable, right? Oftentimes when entering jail, people will have their items thrown away, like ID, and that can present a number of other issues. And really, the list goes on. I could probably talk for a full hour about all of the problems, right, that occur for people once they've been incarcerated for experiencing homelessness. So I don't know how much detail to go into right now because I just want to be respectful of the time, but generally that's why it's important to include people who are directly impacted by homelessness at tables so that we can form solutions that actually serve them and don't hurt them and further harm them.
And Emilia, you talked about how we only are able to house about 30% of the population right now. And I'm thinking about the other 70%. I'm also thinking about the 30. What happens when a transgender youth wants to get housed and they're not being serviced because their gender at birth doesn't match how they identify? What happens when a sibling has to choose between housing and the streets because maybe their family is undocumented? What happens when a spouse has to choose between a men's shelter because they won't allow women in that shelter? How important are those specific accommodations when it comes to housing individuals who are going through homelessness? And how much does it hurt them when you're forcing them into spaces where they shouldn't be in?
Yeah, because our system isn't built right now to be accommodating for everyone, especially those who are people who are transgender, people with pets, people with unconventional families, right? It is a reason why oftentimes we will see people who would prefer and feel safer camping outdoors, right? And I think that's really important that we use that language. There are often, always, in my opinion, right, in someone's mind frame, they have a rational, logical reason to choose if they want to sleep outdoors rather than in a shelter. And I don't want to leave my pet. My pet is the last family member, the last thing I have, right? I was evicted, I lost everything, I'm estranged from my family perhaps, and I'm not gonna separate from my pet. to me, that's perfectly reasonable, right? And rational. And we really need to design our system to be accommodating to anyone, regardless of those needs. There is a really big issue right now where HUD is changing their equal access rule. And this can really present a lot of harm to transgender individuals across the country, where a federal rule is changing where shelters and housing programs do not have to provide accommodations to people and shelter them, as they identify. They don't have to be sheltered according to their gender identification if this rule changes, and that can create a lot of harm for people. We need people to feel safe as they enter into trusting relationships with people. People experiencing homelessness have often already gone through tremendous amounts of trauma. The experience of homelessness itself is traumatizing. So we need to create safe, therapeutic environments for people, and unfortunately right now that's really under threat with the rule change to the equal access law.
Well, that's really interesting that you say that, especially given that right now, a lot of what we're talking about is already so horrible to see, and the high number of youth just here alone in the Southern Nevada region is just very breathtaking to even hear. Given that right now we're in the middle of a pandemic of COVID-19. Already we have such little resources going in the right direction. That just makes me wonder, how has COVID-19, since it started forcing and halting these nonprofit organizations that work like the organizations that we're all involved with, to help this youth, to help the homeless population, and the population of minorities that may be affected by this. How has this pandemic also changed the way that all of your organizations, really, this is for anyone to answer, the pandemic has changed how you guys have had to maneuver helping these people, and how has it restricted you in return?
I can kick us off on this if that makes sense. So being a direct service provider for young people experiencing homelessness, COVID-19 has been a massive challenge in just so many different ways. From the point of view of the youth themselves and what their needs are, and that their needs are growing and changing based on the pandemic. And then from the nonprofit operational side of how do we operate these services in a safe way, and how do we operate these services in a sustainable way. So it's definitely been very complicated to respond to this. So from the youth side, for a lot of the young people that we see, right, many of them were, on the way to, either they had just gotten new jobs, or they were like in the interview process of new jobs. They had, had all these great things going on that were totally at least put on pause, if not destroyed, really, because of COVID. So many of our young people working in the hospitality industry or working in the restaurant industry or other industries, were kind of on their way working toward transitioning out of homelessness. But then COVID-19 came in and just kind of out of nowhere really messed up those prospects for them. And then in addition, a lot of homeless youth who do still attend school, who are school age, rely on school as a place to get hot meals, as a place to get in from the heat or the cold, and have a safe place during the daytime, to all kinds of things like that. It's like a shelter in a lot of ways in the daytime for school for young people. And so schools being closed, jobs shutting down, all of these things, it really made it so that for the young people that we serve, a lot of the other resources that they were relying on or juggling were no longer there. And so NPHY in our position really had to come in to fill in all those gaps, and in a lot of ways become a resource that many of the young people we serve were relying on solely and completely because of the situation with COVID. And so that kind of changed our approach of how to work with the young people. In addition, we literally had to restructure everything about our organization to be able to safely provide services. Things like restructuring all of our engagement activities and our leadership development activities to be virtual. Things like literally restructuring this, who can be at our drop-in center at what time, and how people enter our drop-in center building. We had to change where case management takes place so that there was social distancing to be able to put into there. We had to change literally where we provide. So instead of having people gather in our food pantry and picking out their own food, now our staff picks out food requested by the youth and brings it out to them. We really had to re-envision just everything, our shelters, people sleeping together in the same room. How do we mitigate virus spread if that were to happen? Just so it's been very, very complicated figuring all that out. And then working with funders too, to make sure that they understand the need for flexibility in this situation, because a lot of nonprofits are funded largely by governmental grants and things like that can be very restrictive in the way that you're allowed to spend those funds and operate your program. So, and this has been a situation that's required a lot of flexibility and changes every single day. So being able to get that flexibility with our funders, being able to reimagine all of our services to operate in a safe way, and being able to meet youth's new increased needs, it's definitely been a challenge for sure.
Thank you for that, Melissa. I want to focus kind of like on something similar. And then Melissa, I'd love for you to also answer this question. At Anytown, when we think about social justice, we think about it in terms of not just racism. We think about it in terms of economics, LGBTQ issues, public health issues, education, because we feel it does intersect with homelessness. So therefore, it is a social justice issue. How can we as a community begin to make traction? And I'm using the word traction because this is not just here's $1 million, homelessness is solved, and there you go. How can we as a community begin to make traction to eliminate homelessness and CSEC issues, and even using the terminology behind that? How can we begin to make that traction here in Southern Nevada to begin with?
That's a great question, Rico. Definitely. I think so. One thing is really just recognizing that intersectionality, right? A lot of people think of homelessness as its own issue, kind of in a silo, like that's one issue, and public health is a separate issue, and economic justice is a separate issue, and even housing. Sometimes even housing is seen as a separate issue from homelessness. But the truth of the matter is that these issues are so intimately connected to one another. And if we really want to make traction on ending homelessness among all populations experiencing homelessness, then we really need to look at the root causes of homelessness, what's causing homelessness and what's sustaining homelessness in our community, right? And so a lot of the things that you mentioned are related to those root causes. So for instance, economics, right? So homelessness is an economic issue because just like Lenore said, right, if people aren't making enough money to support themselves, for instance, not having a living wage is an issue that relates to homelessness. Not having equal opportunity in employment and having sustainable jobs that are available across populations, across, all different kinds of groups, that is an issue that relates to homelessness intimately, that causes homelessness. LGBTQ issues that you mentioned, Rico, nationwide, young people, up to 40% of young people experiencing homelessness identify as LGBTQ. And this is a massive issue, right? That is often a cause of homelessness for young people, is coming out to their families and being kicked out. And so that's a major, major problem. So if as a society, we work on LGBTQ issues and uplifting LGBTQ people, uplifting the community, and breaking down stereotypes and barriers and things like that, that improves our ability to be able to prevent homelessness for young people in specific, for example, or public health, right? Lenore also mentioned people who get a whole bunch of medical debt, right? Right now we're in a pandemic. Without having universal health care available in our country, it's impossible for people to be able to go through life and not accumulate medical debt in a way where that might result in them experiencing homelessness. So all of these things are so in education. A young person who does not have a GED or a high school diploma is over 300% more likely to experiencing homelessness than a peer who has a high school diploma, right? So that's a major, major problem. So improving all of these systems, those are truly, in a lot of ways, the way, and housing, of course, are the ways that we really prevent homelessness. Also has to do with immigration, has to do with there's so many systems, right, that it really has to do with. And then how we stop sustaining homelessness, right, is all of these things, but then also doing the kinds of things that Emily was talking about, creating enough services, shelter, housing, to be able to immediately get people off the streets in a place where they feel safe and comfortable, right? So it's not just having X amount of shelter beds or X amount of housing beds. It's having beds that are comfortable for different groups, that people feel safe in, that people feel like they can go to, and that they don't feel it's even riskier than being on the streets, right? So there's so many different factors. And how can we make traction on this as a community? That's an excellent question. Obviously, it's connected to so many different issues. I mean, I think one, being aware of these intersections is where it starts. You know, when you see city council or county commission or the state legislature or the federal government or whoever considering issues that have to do with these other public health, LGBTQ, economic, you know, all education, thinking about how that relates to homelessness and bringing that up when you go to make public comment or when you are writing letters to your elected officials or making phone calls, making those intersections for them to make sure that people can see those intersections. And so they understand, like, hey, not only do we improve, if we do a living wage, you know, not only do we improve our economy from these angles, but hey, we're gonna have way fewer people experiencing homelessness, which will also improve our economy in this way, you know, and just kind of really emphasizing that with elected officials and just looking through all different kinds of policy lenses to affect the things that cause homelessness and break down the barriers that sustain homelessness. And that has to be done through a wide variety of angles, but I think people coming together under this understanding and just creating this surround sound movement around this is really where it starts.
And the way that this conversation is going, we might need to do a part 2 because Melissa's over here going off everybody. So I'd love to get Lenore's take on this. Lenore, what is your take with regards to gaining traction on this issue? And actually, before you answer, I'd love to also let all of our viewers know that are watching on Facebook Live and also here through Zoom that if you have a question for these panelists who are here to really provide information to us as community members, please ask that. Raise your hand, submit it in the chat box. If you're on Facebook, put it on Facebook. We've got a team on Facebook. We've got a team here that will catch your question. So please go ahead and start thinking about that question. Sister, go ahead.
Definitely. So ways that we can gain some traction. So first I want to add that, so we've seen that COVID-19 kind of expose some of the tender spots that we have in our nation. And some of the things that people are sharing is like, how do we go back to normal? First of all, we don't want to go back to that normal. We don't want to go back to a normal where people don't have access to healthcare. We don't want to go back to the normal of mass incarceration. We don't want to go back to the normal where children do not have access to Wi-Fi and laptops into their schools. So a way that we can start building traction is finding those targeted areas and start rebuilding those systems. And if systems are not rooted in justice, if systems are not rooted in liberation, if they're not rooted in prosperity, we need to work actively towards dismantling them. And how do we dismantle them? Is by exposing them. We've seen that everyone are having these equity grants and they're saying that this is where all this money is going to go. We need to start funneling the money towards the nonprofits that are already doing the work. This is not the time for the re-emerging, for people who think they have passion. All of a sudden you're not racist anymore. No, people who've been doing the work prior to COVID-19, how do we get the funding into their hands? Then we need to normalize having those conversations. When people are saying, man, there was that prostitute thing that happened here, changing that language and being okay to change that language at dinner tables. When we want to make a sustainable change, what we do is we go on Facebook, and that's cute because we're on Facebook now and that's necessary. But a lot of times those dinner talk tables that we're having with our family, that we're having with our friends, that is normalizing the behaviors that are creating these systems, that has to be dismantled within. Those conversations have to start changing. We have to change the way we talk about things. This is not the era for us to talk about the shade room. This is not the era for us to talk about Kim Kardashian and Kanye, where we got people on the streets right now. This is not the time to be worried about billionaires. How do we create more housing and not projects? We're talking about equitable housing. How do we start going to the politicians that we know that are running right now, that we have a lot of people that are running for office? What does that look like? How do we engage into a lot of those elections? How do we start filtering out the people that are going to build out our communities and remove and never give access to the people that are working actively towards destroying our communities? How do we start expanding the conversations about race, about immigration, about homelessness, about sex trafficking? A lot of that, how we're having it now, is conversation. So one tool I can say, one way I can challenge you all is when we have this recording, take those tidbits and go back out into your communities, go back into your friend groups, go back into your social media and start sharing that language in that conversation and watch that spread. If we can watch a pandemic spread, if we can watch social issues spread, what would happen if we start talking about prosperity and liberation with the same passion and the same intention? And that's what we need to begin doing. Normalizing the conversation of a better today and not tomorrow, because we have people right now who cannot wait for us to get it. So those of us that do get it, we got work to do.
Lenore, thank you for your spirit, your fire. You know, I've had the luxury of being around many young people, Gen Zers, and they've taught me a few things or two. I think this is the appropriate time to say, period, with a T, period.
Thank you, Rico.
Thank you for doing that. Abe, go ahead and take it away, because I'm just an attendee here as well.
Thank you, Rico. Yeah, so a lot of what you touched on, Lenore, is our youth, and we've been talking about how specifically in the Southern Nevada region we've had so many people affected, and talking about having these conversations is very important. And although we can't have a Camp Anytown right now at this moment to have these conversations, it's good that we're having it right now, because a lot of the youth that we take in at the Anytown program, they're going to be first-time voters in November. A lot of these youth, we gather youth from every corner of the valley. So we have a very diverse group of students every single camp, and still ongoing right now with what all these projects that we're doing. So you also touched a bit on contacting your representatives and your local representatives. How would you go about that? How would you speak out to this group of youth that want to take that step, that we knows that we need to have these conversations? And what federal elections do you say pay attention to? What organizations do you say get involved with this organization, pay attention to this organization, contact them, and get involved to persuade these elected officials to act today, as you said, to end homelessness, rather than leaving it for any professionals of tomorrow that we will all be, starting it right here, right now.
Definitely. So one thing that I want to say, I want to bring the spirit of John Lewis into this space, right? May he rest in peace, because he did the work that we needed. But you know what was so extraordinary about John Lewis is not only that he had a long legacy, but he started organizing as a young person. He didn't wait for permission. He looked at the world as it was and said, you know what? I don't want this for tomorrow. So one of the things to start doing is getting your peers, and you can start your own organizing. Start thinking about the issues that matter to you. If you find that you're not invited to a table, figure out to have your own table. And then in that strategy, how do you dismantle the tables that do not invite you? This is how the energy we need to start having to this space. You have panelists here. Hold us accountable, reaching out to us in our organizations that are already working on those policy works and those policy issues, and going on those websites, going on NPHY, going to different websites, getting those talking points, and showing up when we have town halls. Right now, because of COVID-19, a lot of things are virtual. So go on Facebook. Something that I've been doing, and it's so simple, is going on different hashtags that really matter to me and trying to find all of the organizations and the resources that are happening, and then joining in on those conversations. If you're nervous, if you're afraid, if you're scared, that's okay, but your tomorrow cannot wait for it. In regard to getting in contact with your local politician, you can go to nevada.gov and there's a directory. There's a lot of information there where you can start finding the politicians that are within your district that you can start reaching out to. But you know what? A lot of them are on Facebook too. And I will say, start commenting on their page. This is not the time to do DMs, because if they're not going to respond to you in private, put them on blast on those comments. Go on those pages and say, here are some issues on my district. What can we do? Some of the elections that we need to worry about now is that we see that there's an election for a lot of our judges. When we're talking about mass incarceration, that is critical. So really going in and zeroing in on this. And then for the first-time voters, congratulations, and I'm excited for you. We have a presidential election coming up. This administration is not designed to sustain human life. So getting involved, going into that, and going and talking to your friends. Maybe what that looks like, if there's going to be mail by vote, we don't know what COVID is going to look like. Inviting your friends over and saying, or your friends that you've been safely social distancing with, or going on a Zoom call and saying, okay, how are we going to do our mail? How are we going to submit this by vote? So there's a lot of ways that you can get involved in, and also starting your own movements. Don't wait for adultism to invite you to those tables. If you see something that you're passionate about, you see an issue that you're directly impacted by, get the folks in your community that you know support you, say, here's my ideas, and hold them accountable to sustain that and to use their resources to empower you so that you can start working towards what that vision looks like. So I know that there was a lot of those different reasons, but resources, but I will circle back to reaching out to the panelists here. You guys got our names. You know where we work. So all you got to do is go on Facebook and Instagram, look for us, and put us on blast. Put me on blast. Comment on that page and say, Lenore, these are the things that you shared. How do I get more directly involved? So those are just some of those things that I want to share. But again, John Lewis passed at 80 years old. His documentary just came out, and this was a young organizer. The civil rights movement would not have happened without young people. And this nation will not be prosperous without the voices of young people.
Thank you, Lenore. And Emily, Abe earlier quoted, the what you said at City Hall, and the reason why he was able to get that quote word by word was because I was actually watching Facebook Live while you were doing that testimony, and I saved that video on my phone, and I saved it for a reason. The reason why I saved it is because I also oftentimes, we as community members, especially right now in COVID-19 and how this is all transpiring, it can get very lonely at times. But I think when you see other people that are close to you, when you see your friends that are advocating for you and not caring who that person is across the table and saying, with all due respect, right? Emily, how important is it for you and the Nevada Homeless Alliance to not only hold people accountable, but also be held accountable?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think, what needs to happen most is the political will, right? We know what works, we know what the solutions are, we lack the political will to invest where is needed. But I think before that is because we need to increase the community will, right? So like Kanisha was saying, we need to hold our electeds accountable. They need to know about the issues that we care about so that they care about it. If we're not talking to them about it, then they aren't going to care about it, right? I want to give a shout out to Gabby. I see her in the audience. Gabby, she works for one of our Congress members, Dina Titus, right? Sorry, I sometimes forget which office each member works for, but I believe Gabby works for Dina. No, Susie Lee. Sorry, I'm so sorry. Sorry, I messed that up big time. Susie Lee. Anyways, just having relationships, working with the staff of elected officials, and holding them accountable when you really need it, right? So sometimes it's informal meetings. Hey, I just want to have a talk with you about what we're working on right now, about the things I care about. I'm seeing this issue in my neighborhood and I really care about it. I don't think it's right that I'm seeing so many people having to sleep outdoors in my neighborhood. What are you doing about this, right? And then when it really comes, time to take action, right? You have those relationships already built. So my email isn't going into some random black hole at Susie Lee's office. It's going to Gabby, right? Hey, Gabby, I really need I need Congresswoman Susie Lee to take a stand on this and vote this way on the CARES Act. Like, we need the CARES Act to include at least this much for homeless assistance funding, right? And that makes a difference, having those relationships. So don't, like Kanisha said, don't wait, for someone to invite you to schedule an appointment with your elected representatives at every level, right? City council, which, we've seen that, we don't turn out for local elections. And has had devastating consequences in our community right now, right? Devastating consequences that we haven't turned out to local elections, right? So vote, obviously, have relationships with your elected officials and their staff. I think especially their staff, right? Because they're the ones, Gabby is the one who's gonna, be in Susie's ear saying, this funding is really important to these agencies in Southern Nevada, and here's why. So we need to show up so that our elected officials show up for us. And then as far as us being held accountable, right, we need to realize, right, when we need to be more inclusive. So just as we said, the city should include people who've been directly impacted by homelessness at their tables when they're discussing policy. We realize that we need to do that always too, right? So we're having a policy roundtable tomorrow, and it includes someone who's been directly impacted by homelessness. And that's our commitment always going forward, right? It's that if we're having any kind of consequential conversation about this issue, that we are going to make sure that people who are directly impacted are a part of that conversation, and not just a part of it, but that they're leading it.
Thank you so much. And just something I wanted to add to that as well, since we've been talking about getting involved, contacting your representatives, we're a resource. every single organization that has been named, including Anytown Las Vegas, is a resource, especially for young people, because right now, as we said, we had such a small voter turnout in every single election that holds so much importance to where we go from here. So I think a lot of it is taking that step as well as a youth, or whoever that just wants to take that step at any moment of their life to just get in contact. Like they said, you have all of our names, you have all of our resources. Recently, I've gotten involved with the university. I go to UNLV, and something I've learned in my recent time in office on the Senate is that people want these resources. They want to see the help. They want to see the link. They want to see the information, and they want to share that information. We just need to provide it. And you can be someone that provides that. For a long time, I had this block in my head that I'm this youth and I'm not really involved. I'm trying to get involved, but I don't know how. And recently I saw an injustice that I saw. I had a resource that I was like, oh my God, I wish someone would have shared this with me. And sometimes taking that step is being the person that shares that resource, starting to be the person that gets involved, that like you guys said, making those contacts, and knowing that people, so you have that direct email towards Gabby, you have those direct correlations in your Southern Nevada community. So thank you for that little input, and I hope everyone gained a bit of inspiration in getting involved. So thank you.
Could I add a tiny bit to ways to get involved? Or
Yeah.
yeah. Awesome. So yeah, just another thing to say, echo everything that everybody said 1,000%, but just to echo a couple other ways as well. So it is true that homelessness is related to every level of the government, right? So, local elections, state elections, federal elections, they're all making decisions that have to do with homelessness. And just like Lenore said too, judges, and there's other people that are really affecting this issue. But there's other ways in addition, besides all these things are extremely important, but there's other ways that also involve contacting people who are not necessarily elected officials, but who are actually helping government rules to become enacted. So I bring this up because of what Emily brought up earlier, that recently the Trump administration is now trying to change the equal access rule in housing and urban development so that basically emergency shelters funded by the federal government through the largest program that funds emergency shelters, currently, there's a rule that transgender individuals should be able to receive shelter based on their gender identity. And the Trump administration is trying to change that. So now instead it's biological sex. And so the way that works is that it's not a law, it's a rule that department of the federal government is changing. And to do that, they're required to have an open public comment period, where people from the general public can actually comment on these rules and say why we think that proposed rule is a good idea or a bad idea, and why, and what your thoughts are about it. And that particular rule change actually has a big national campaign going on. And a great resource for that is they have a website called housingsaveslives.org. And if you go to that website, there's actually information right there of how there's a form right there you can literally fill in to put your comments on this proposed rule change. And they have all kinds of explanation of giving you background info, giving you ideas, etc. So even things like public comment on federal rules is another way to get involved that's a little bit obscure that we might not think of, but is another thing that can really make a huge impact, because they actually have to respond to all the comments. So that's another thing. And then I also just want to put a plug in too for a group that MPHY helps to co-facilitate. So there's a group in town called Young Adults in Charge, or YAC, and that is our local regional efforts around homelessness. That is their youth action board. So it's made up of youth ages 16 through 24 who have experienced homelessness in their lives. And again, that's using that broad definition of homelessness. That includes couch surfing, that includes staying at daily weeklies, that includes being doubled up, et cetera, et cetera. And that group meets on a bi-weekly basis to work on a bunch of things, whether it's policy or whether it's giving input and feedback to our local providers and our local regional efforts as they design programs that are actually going to serve those youth. And that group has open membership for any youth who has experienced homelessness, who's in those ages, who'd like to participate. So if anybody on this call is interested in that and has that background, all you have to do is email youngadultsincharge@gmail.com. And I'm sure we can get this info out other ways. I think maybe Rico's writing in the chat. that's another great way to get involved, because through that group, we actually worked together with a state legislator, and we actually got a law passed in the last legislative session. And those youth really were the leaders of that process. They took the lead on that. They helped to write the law. They testified to Senate and Assembly committees. They were super, super involved in that process. And the law was actually passed unanimously. It was a law that helped to break down barriers to vital identification documents. So if anyone is interested in joining that group, or just reaching out to learn more about what that group does or how they did that, so your own group can do something similar, please let us know.
Yeah, so it's housing-saves-lives.org, and then the email also is youngadultsinCharge@gmail.com. And we'll make sure to also put that in our Facebook as well for our viewers that are tuning in on Facebook. Now, I'm looking at the crowd here, and we've got folks from various sectors that come and work in different places and different fields. I'd love to give this space to you to ask a question. It's not, every day where you get, three, experts on this issue, three people with countless years of experience with homelessness, youth development, program development, and all sorts of things. So really take advantage of this, the opportunity. Travis, I know you're itching to ask a question, so, you might as well just go ahead and do it, man.
Yeah, you know me, man. Of course, absolutely. I also work for one of these offices that Emily was just talking about, and we've got a lot of folks reaching out to us. We are sending out privacy release forms to like unified addresses, like ones that they individually can all go check. But then they're asking us, well, where can I go if I can't, seek shelter in city of Las Vegas, sort of thing, right? And a lot of times it turns into, actually, I'm pretty sure I have another staff member from my office on this call as well. Hi, Dev. So would love to just hear your feedback on how can we help our constituents that are continuing to reach out to us about, the local level when those that are experiencing homelessness have that, but like we want to be able to direct it to as many services as possible.
Hi, Travis. Long time no see, friend. So good to see your face. I think, that's where those relationships with the local agencies come to your advantage, right? We want to have relationships with you for obvious reasons, and you need relationships with us too, so that you can navigate the people you're serving, your constituents, to the right services. In this way too, you also learn, where the gaps are in the community, right? That, we don't have a bed available for this person because we don't have enough funding to accommodate everyone in our community who needs it. But more specific, oftentimes, I'm sure you're hearing from constituents that have really specific issues, right, with accessing services, and you need an expert in those agencies to help you navigate that. So those relationships have that advantage for you. Build relationships with the local nonprofits in your district. Know them, know what services they offer, know their staff well, visit them regularly, really know their services, right? As you would if you were a volunteer there. Actually volunteer with them. That's a great way to get to know their staff and the people they serve, and they, I'm sure, would love to have you. So
good idea.
Yeah, so you can quickly pick up a call and say, hey, MJ, I have a young person right now in my, on the other line, and this is their situation. What can you do to help me get them to shelter tonight, right? And MJ, with her expertise, is going to be able to navigate you through that in no way that Nevada 211 could, although Nevada 211 is also an excellent resource, right? But that's my opinion, is that those relationships will have that advantage for you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that too, specifically for youth. I totally agree with that. The relationships are super important, and definitely about like complicated situations that might arise that might require some discussion or something like that, 1000%. But also for youth, just to make sure that you're aware of and to spread the word about the Safe Place program. So this is a program that NPHY operates here in Southern Nevada, but it's basically a 24-hour mobile crisis intervention program that's available at Terrible Herbs gas stations. It's available at City of Las Vegas fire stations. It's available at Las Vegas Clark County Libraries and Henderson Libraries, and it's also available on the RTC buses and as well as at our drop-in center. And this is a 24-hour-a-day mobile crisis intervention program that not just homeless youth, but any youth in crisis can access. And all they have to do is go to one of those locations and say, I need a safe place, or go to a city bus and say, I need a ride to a safe place. They'll receive a free ride to a safe place location. If they go to a Terrible Herbst, if they go to any of those locations and say, I need a safe place, then they will actually call us, and we have crisis responders on call who will be out there within 30 minutes of their call, go meet them out there, talk to them, assess their situation, and then depending on the situation, provide them transportation to wherever they need to go. So sometimes it's just back home, but if they are experiencing homelessness, it's oftentimes to our emergency shelter or our drop-in center or a partner agency as well, if a partner agency is actually the best fit or has the correct availability that they're looking for. So the Safe Place program is a really fantastic resource when it comes to young people ages 18 and under.
Also wanted to add to that. Sorry, go ahead first.
Oh, so sorry. I just want to come because my response was really specific to the congressional staff on the call, but any one of us can be a bridge for people who are in need of services. And so Nevada 211, I mentioned that you can carry around what I call like a freeway card, which is a small resource guide. Help Hope Home in Southern Nevada has one. It's a condensed resource guide, and I keep them in the sleeve of my car. So if I'm at a light where someone is in need of help, I can say, hey, would a resource guide be helpful to you? I have this resource guide. It can tell you where you can go tonight for shelter, where you can go to get a hot meal, where you can go to get a shower or whatever, right? Or anytime you have an opportunity to just directly say, hey, how can I help you? You need $1 to take the bus to your friend's house so you have shelter for the night? No problem. Here's $1, right? Or whatever it might be. You never know until you ask someone what they need, how you might be able to help them. So don't be afraid to do that.
That is actually amazing. I have never thought of that idea. And really quickly, just wanted to add last minute. I wish I could share every resource that I knew from the UNLV, but UNLV is at the source of at the heart of Las Vegas, and it offers so many resources. We have an immigration clinic that helps free and pro bono immigration cases and help with your DACA. If you just Google community and crisis resources, it'll pop up with the UNLV. It'll say The Practice. It is the UNLV program that offers all of these resources. It's a long directory of resources in the Southern Nevada community that I didn't know about, but you can go ahead and check it out. Contact, if you're not in the Southern Nevada community, a lot of these resources come from a lot of local colleges and universities, and that is always another option as well. If you don't really know where to go, you need some help navigating to where you do need to go, those are a great place to find those resources.
All right, is there another member of the audience that would like to pose a question? All right, so while you formulate your question, I'm going to ask a question, and there's no virtual town hall without its own controversy. So if you're watching on Facebook Live, tell the kids to shush or go ahead and go in a room. I've got my room locked up. My kids can't bother me. So I hope you do the same. So at our last virtual town hall, when we began having discussions with individuals, young people, we wanted to host someone that can guide us through the process of beyond the protest. What can we as community members do beyond the protest, beyond the holding the sign, beyond the marching, right? And this is no takeaway that that's not important, but we want to do more, right? So we encourage our panelists last month to really allow us to think critically of this issue. So here's my next question, and I'm going to title it, is Beyond the Sandwich. There's a lot of very, very good-hearted people, maybe some organizations that hand out food to individuals, right? But that's all they do. And I've working in this space and working with young people and homelessness, I've seen how that can oftentimes even be the more of a hurdle than helping someone. So how imperative is it for people who want to get involved that they go beyond the sandwich and do more than that? Because giving someone a sandwich is almost equivalent to someone saying, I'm for racial justice, I'm gonna post this Black Lives Matter graphic on my Facebook, and I'm good. Well, you're not good. And that post did not make that person situation better. So I have this post here, and I'd love for the panelists to answer this in the best way they know how. Lenore, you know, I have you as a friend on Facebook. You recently reposted this Facebook post, which has been sitting very, very heavy on my heart. And it says this: why do people think that if you're poor, you're not allowed to have self-respect? No, a homeless person does not need to eat whatever you give them. Yes, a poor person is allowed to just have a day of fun. Stop policing dignity. I think a conversation in regards to compassion is something that I'd love to get into. Panelists, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so this was my social media post. I guess I'll start. So I think the first thing that's really critical is first regulate your mindset before you go into it, right? There's a difference between solidarity and saviorism. So there's the idea where you see someone and you're like, oh my God, they're experiencing this is horrible. You give them a sandwich. They don't probably even like cheese, and now you have an attitude. Now you say homelessness is not real. You gave the person a sandwich and they threw it out, right? So I think the first thing is really regulating your why as you're going into these spaces of advocacy. Saviorism is the concept of, we go into different countries. My family's from Haiti. People go there and they're expecting us to be so thankful because of all the missionary work. Solidarity is giving us the tools and the resources that we need to rebuild our own communities. We don't need people coming in to fix it. We need the resources to fix it ourselves. So measure your heart before you start engaging with folks, because you could do more harm with well intentions, right? And then I would also say the organizations that are already doing it. It's natural that you start hearing about a cause. I think that there's a lot of us here, and now you're probably very motivated and you want to start a nonprofit, but there's people on the ground that are doing the work, and they're doing the work tirelessly. So really allying yourself with these organizations and start learning from them. Start learning those best practices, those do's or don'ts, what works, what doesn't work. And then also, I would say, really coming together with these nonprofits or these organizations on building sustainable tools and resources. A sandwich is not going to help someone. It's going to feed them one night, right? So is that job placement? Is that allying at your own job, saying, hey, we need to have more representation here? And what does that look like? Is that saying, you know, I have extra $50 today, let me get a few bus passes and let me go donate to the organizations that are doing this work? And what does that look like? It's not throwing away the clothes that no longer fit you, but while you're shopping for something nice and new, picking up a brand new shirt and saying, I'm going to go donate this so that somebody else can have something that is new, that feels good to them. So it's really, I would say, the most important thing is measuring your heart before you go into it. If you find that you're trying to save homeless people, you're trying to save people who've been exploited, then you're not doing the work. When you find that you're trying to make sure that you're dismantling the issue of homelessness, that you're trying to make sure that youth are no longer being exploited, then now you're on the right track. So really a lot like allying yourself with the organizations that are doing the work, figuring out what are those best practices, what's going to work, what's not going to work, and then coming up with ways to come up with sustainable resources, like the advocating at your jobs, like the saying, how do we make sure that we have more than one meal coming to an organization a day opposed from this one sandwich? But if what you have is the sandwich, and that's really where your heart is, and you want to give that, that's also beautiful. But just making sure that the mentality that you have going into that is a mentality to end the issue and not to make yourself feel good and have a conversation with your friends of who you saved that night.
I'd love to hear from the rest of the panelists. Thank you.
Yeah, totally. Emily, go ahead.
No, go ahead, MJ.
So yeah, I think that, you know, that concept is very, very important to MPHY and the work that we do, the beyond the sandwich and also both beyond the sandwich in terms of absolutely the work that we do. We try to be as comprehensive as possible to really provide young people with the tools, the resources, the time. It also requires time, you know, to go through these processes of processing trauma, processing all the situations that have gone on and being able to figure out, if you don't know where your next meal is going to come from, it's probably pretty hard for you to think about who you want to be when you grow up, or what your next step's going to be, or, if you want to go to college, or what you want to study, or what your dreams are, so we really see the purpose of our services as meeting those survival needs. That's obviously very important, but it's only the first step on a much, much longer journey that we're really trying to walk with these youth. And that's really, really important, because offering homelessness is not a simple issue, right? As I'm sure is very clear from our conversation today, it's connected to so many different issues, and it's not simple. It's not giving one person a sandwich is not going to end their homelessness. It's a much, much broader thing that requires all kinds of things, from depending on the individual person, from help getting a sustainable, well-paying job, to help with education, to therapy, to all kind of help obtaining housing, to all different life skills, and all different kinds of things that are required to help and empower people depending on their situation, their needs, and their dreams and their ideals, right? But in addition, I think that this concept of, well, if somebody's experiencing homelessness, they're lucky, maybe they hate cheese, but they're lucky to have the cheese sandwich or whatever. They're lucky to have, old socks, or they're lucky to have, whatever, people who are not homeless are generous enough to give them. That idea also really, really needs to be dismantled, just like Lenore was referring to. At MPHY, our mission is to eliminate homelessness among Nevada's youth, but our vision is to ensure that young people experiencing homelessness have the same opportunities for a quality future enjoyed by others in our community. And that is really, really important to the work that we do, and work to dismantle homelessness throughout the country. Because with our youth, we work really hard to make sure that over the holidays that they get, gifts that they can enjoy, that are what their own dreams and wishes are. We work with them to take them on trips. We take them to amusement parks, or to camping, or things like that, because we want to make sure that they have opportunities that others have in our community. Not that they have the bare minimum because that's all they deserve. No, it's the opposite. They've been through so much difficulty and trauma, and they're working so hard to, move on to the next phase in their life. They deserve the world, right? And our job is to support them in that way, and to be able to make those connections for them, and help them get there. So definitely it's the opposite of the deserving. It's really, we as a community and as a village need to rise up to support these young people, because other people haven't, and it's our responsibility to really uplift them in those ways.
Yeah, I agree with everything that MJ and Kanisha have said, and especially the asking yourself why. Like, why are you interested in serving, and let that really guide you, right? Is it to get likes on social media? Then maybe you need to reevaluate, right? It's okay to share good deeds that you're doing, but it shouldn't be your driving motivation, right? I think asking people who are experiencing homelessness, how can I help you? And really being open to their response and letting that guide you. And again, partnering with local homeless service organizations who are already in the space, who are already doing this work and need help, right? They need support, and calling them and saying, how can I help you? Right? I want to do something this week, and I want to serve, or I want to get my friends together for a project, and we want to do something meaningful. What would be the most meaningful to your organization and the people you're serving? Our website actually has a menu, what we call a menu of opportunity, and it includes about 50 different ideas for ways that you can partner with one of our local homeless service organizations. We surveyed them a couple of years back and asked them, like, we asked that question for you, right? What is it that you need from the community? And we broke it down by, employment, right? I loved what you said about that. Right, that is absolutely that's one of the biggest barriers that our homeless community faces, right, is unemployment. So if you have a position open in your job, tell your boss, or if you are the boss, to reach out to local homeless service organizations to post that job opportunity. Most of them have dedicated staff that are looking or on the hunt for open career opportunities. Do a job fair, actually go to the agency, sit down and do on-the-spot interviews with people, and whenever possible, offer on-the-spot employment. That is absolutely one of the most meaningful ways that you can partner with a local homeless service organization. And don't make assumptions around that your job is highly skilled and that people who are at this agency may not meet the criteria. You absolutely should not make any assumptions around the skills, work experience of people who are experiencing homelessness in our community. They're highly skilled, highly proficient, great, hardworking people who are experiencing homelessness right now in our community, and they just need the opportunity to show you that, right? So So that's a great way to partner.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I agree with everything you say. Running a bit out of time, so I would just wanted to wrap it up by asking all of you if you could lastly please give all of your website of the organization you work for, social media handles, and if there's any way that your organization directly has opportunities for volunteer work that we could have people start getting involved, and just ways of getting involved with your specific organizations, if you would like to share just to close up.
Okay, I'll go. I guess you guys seen I unmuted my mic. So my organization that I serve with is Youth Collaboratory. So you can go to youthcollaboratory.org, and there you'll see just a plethora of resources. And I would say that we're constantly working to engage with young people in our policy work in all levels of the work that we're doing. And my email is lenore@youthcollaboratory.org. You can reach me there. I don't have an Instagram. I believe I have a Twitter that I haven't been on for years, but on Facebook, you can find me at k.lenore Jean Baptiste, and feel free to friend me. And I just wanted to also just give just one tidbit. I mean, because language is powerful, right? And because of the language of the times right now, you know, we're saying homeless people, we're saying folks that's been sex trafficked. But one way we can start shifting the culture is how we identify folks, because humans are humans first, and they're humans in the middle, and they're humans last. So opposed from saying like homeless people, people experiencing homelessness, right? People experiencing poverty. So one thing that we can all do collectively in solidarity with our folks with lived experiences is really naming their humanity first, because that what's follow is an oppression, and it's not an identifier. It's not who they are. It's an experience that needs to be dismantled. But again, you can find me at lenore@youthcollaboratory.org.
I'm waiting for you, MJ. But I guess that you put yourself back on mute. I'll just share that our organization really needs volunteers to drive our work. And if you're interested in advocacy, we really need help there too. There's actually an opportunity right now. Next week on August 4th, County Commissioner Justin Jones has introduced an ordinance that would prohibit source of income discrimination. So this will ensure that landlords cannot deny a rental application based on someone's source of income, right? So whether that be unemployment benefits, TANF, whether they have a Section 8 voucher, whatever their legal source of income might be, that cannot be a basis for approving or denying someone's rental application. Also, it would prohibit landlords from denying someone's rental application because they have an eviction related to COVID-19. So if they have an eviction on their record, because the eviction moratorium right now, the statewide moratorium, is scheduled to expire on September 1st. That if they are evicted because of COVID-19 related reasons, that can't, landlords can't deny their rental application for that reason. So this is a really, really important piece of legislation that's right now going to be voted on next week on August 4th at the Board of County Commissioners in Clark County. So if you can show up virtually to that meeting or in person, make public comment in support of that ordinance. We need that ordinance to protect renters. So that's an immediate advocacy alert right now that we need you to get behind. But you can go on our website and sign up to receive ongoing newsletters from us, so we can continue to alert you on an ongoing basis about ways for you to get involved.
What is your website?
NevadaHomelessAlliance.org.
Perfect. And do you have Instagram and Facebook?
We do, and our handle is NHA Voice.
Perfect. And that is via Instagram. Perfect.
And
Thank
Twitter.
you.
We have a Twitter.
Awesome. Yeah. So our website is mphy.org. And that's really a great place to find information about what we're doing, and particularly for volunteering. We currently are still we're really focusing on virtual volunteering right now with the pandemic going on, and we've actually created a whole plethora of virtual volunteer opportunities so people can get involved from the comfort of their own home. So you can check those virtual volunteer opportunities out at mphy.org/COVID-19. And we have a whole full listing of volunteer opportunities that you can take part in virtually. And there's a way to reach out and ask questions there as well. In addition, when it comes to our advocacy work, we have a specific website dedicated to that as well. And that's mphy.org/themovement. So if you visit that, you can also see some of our advocacy work. We've had 3 annual summits so far, but we're working on our 4th annual this year, which is likely going to be virtual. So check out that website for some more information about that if anyone's interested in participating in that. And then we're very, very active on social media. So you can check us out on Facebook. If you just look up Nevada Partnership for Homeless Youth, we have a very active Instagram. Our Instagram is just Nevada Homeless Youth. And yeah, and we have a Twitter as well. So you can check us out on social media and see what we're doing through all those means as well. And if you'd like to email me personally, my email is Melissa, MELISSA @mphy.org.
Thank you, Melissa. And shout out to Clinton for the plug. He put in that virtual opportunities flyer in there. I can't say this enough. I'm indebted to the 3 of you panelists for showing up and being a part of this virtual town hall. I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I also want to give honor where our honor is due to this young man, my Venezuelan brother, Abe Lugo, who came up with an idea of bringing his community, his peers together and find really bring people so that they can understand this issue from a different angle and hear directly from folks that are helping out these folks. His campaign is titled United After. We were rolling out some amazing content right now, and this virtual town hall was sort of his coming out moment, letting the entire world know that young people in this world have a voice, and thank you for amplifying that voice. And Abe, it's an honor to serve alongside of you, and to all of our viewers, thank you for showing up. We will make sure to upload this video on YouTube, post it on our social media, in addition to our Facebook viewers who are tuning in. Thank you so much for showing up. And Layla, who was our Facebook monitor, keeping track of all the Facebook comments and giving us that support in that area. Abe, do you want to have any last minute comments, my brother, before we wrap up?
You know, I always do, of course. Thank you all, firstly, for joining. It really does mean a lot because a lot of the times we talk about taking that next step, getting involved, educating yourself. And this moment, this live in itself is one of those moments. So thank you for making that possible. Thank you for all of your support to everyone that came, and Rico to being the best partner that I could have ever asked for. So thank you all. And I hope you all truly do look at that information, dissect it, listen to it, and utilize it to help our community, because we need it. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody.